lesson today, we're going to be completing the square. So we have this big picture right here. What we're going to do is we're going to complete it and turn it into a square. So if you can see, we have one big box which represents x squared. We have our long rectangles. We have 8 of those. And we still don't have a complete square. So we need some smaller squares to help complete the square. So now that we've completed that square, how many small squares were needed? Well, it was 16 to complete the square. So now what we have is x squared plus 8x plus 16. Let's take a look at the next one. We have this big figure here. There's a piece missing, and we need to complete the square. We have to create how many small squares? 9. So now we have 1x squared, 6 x boxes, and 9 small units. So what we're going to do now is we're going to factor this. When we factor this, we get x plus 4 times x plus 4, that quantity squared. And the other one, when we factor it, we get x plus 3 quantity squared. So next we're going to practice factoring. In problems 3 through 5, we're going to factor each polynomial completely. Let's start that first. X squared plus 6x plus 9 factors to x plus 3 quantity squared. Okay, let's factor the next one. It is x plus 4 times x plus 4, or we can rewrite it as x plus 4, that quantity squared. You try number 5. Here we go. It's x minus 5, that quantity squared. So in number 6, check out number 6. I'm giving you the factors. Can you write the polynomial? I'll give you a second to try that. Or you can push pause on the video. Did you get x squared minus 14x plus 49? Okay. So in problem number 7, what we're going to do is we're going to find a value for c that's going to make the polynomial a perfect square trinomial like 1 through 6. And then we're going to write the polynomial in factored form. So x squared minus 20x plus what? We're going to take half of the negative 20, which is 10. And then we're going to square that and put it right here, and we get 100. So we just wrote the polynomial, which is a perfect square trinomial, x squared minus 20x plus 10. Half the middle term, and then square that term. Let's take a look at number 8. Half of 16 is 8. 8 squared is 64. Here's our perfect square trinomial, and here it is factored. Uh-oh. Let's take a look at the next one. Number 9. We take half of our middle term, b, which is b over 2. And then we square that, and we get b over 2 quantity squared. In number 10, if we take half of our middle term, which is 7, we have 7 over 2. What do you think we get if we square 7 over 2? You got it. 49 over 4. So this is going to lead into our lesson, solved by completing the square. So here's our equation. F of x is equal to x squared plus 14x minus 15. We're going to isolate the constant term. That's the term without a variable. So we're going to add 15 to each side. So we get x squared plus 14x is equal to 15. Next, we're going to take half of our linear term, which is the 1 in front of x. So x squared plus 14x plus something is going to be equal to 15 plus something. So here we go. We're going to take half of our middle term, which is 7. And then we're going to square 7, and we're going to get 49. So I'm going to put 49 on each side because we got to keep our equations balanced. So now we're going to go ahead and write it as a perfect square trinomial. So x plus 7 squared is equal to 64. And where did we get 64 from? It's 15 plus 49. Last step, we're going to take the square root of each side, and we get x plus 7 is equal to plus or minus 8. So x is equal to negative 7 because we subtract 7 on each side, and we get negative 7 plus or minus 8. So let's work with the positive first. X is equal to negative 7 plus 8, which gives us 1. And x is equal to negative 7 minus 8, which gives us negative 15. So go back through the steps. We isolate the constant term by putting it on the other side. We take half of our linear term, which is the term with the x. We square it, and we add that number to both sides. And what are we doing? We're completing the perfect square. Let's try another one. Step 1, isolate the constant term. Let's move it to the other side. Subtract 29 from each side. We have x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 29. Next step, we're going to take half of our linear term, which is the term that has the x. So half of that is going to give us negative 2. And negative 2 squared is going to give us 4. So we're adding 4 on both sides. Now that we have a perfect square trinomial of x squared minus 4x plus 4, we can factor it. And that becomes x minus 2 quantity squared. Well, what do we have on the other side? Yes, negative 25. Next step, we can solve by the square root method. We'll take the square root of each side, and we get x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 5i. How did we get 5i? Well, we got 5i because there is a negative under the radical. So let's go ahead and add 2 to each side. We get x is equal to 2, just like that. Just like that. Let's do the next one. X squared plus 5x plus 3 is equal to 0. Move the constant term to the other side by subtracting 3 on each side, and we get x squared plus 5x is equal to negative 3. Let's go ahead and try to create the perfect square. We're going to take half of our linear term, so that's 5 over 2. And we're going to square that for 25 over 4 on each side. We're going to go ahead and factor. Our perfect square trinomial will now look like this. X plus 5 over 2 and that quantity squared. Well, when we add negative 3 to positive 25 over 4, we get 13 over 4. We're now ready to solve by the square root method. We take the square root of each side, and we get x plus 5 over 2 is equal to plus or minus, don't forget your plus or minus, the square root of 13 over 2. Let's see what's next. We get x is equal to negative 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Now, to recap, what are we doing? We are going to isolate the
variable, take half of the linear term, square it, create the perfect square trinomial, and then go ahead and solve by the square root method. And that concludes our lesson. We'll practice in the next step.